Hello, and welcome to Women in Business, where we interview entrepreneurs and senior managers and show you the strengths, successes, obstacles, and roadblocks women experience in business. Since I believe every person in business needs to be visible, I'd like to invite you to watch www.sob6, that's the number 6, tips.com, which will give you some valuable information should you get the call to be on radio or TV, which I think is extremely important. If you'd like to contact me personally, drop me a line at Gail Carson, that's Gayle, Gail Carson 13 at gmail.com, or go to my website, www.spunkyoldbroad.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter.
I have a wonderful guest today for Women in Business, and her name is Erin Jewell. She's a Thrive Global Top 10 Coach of 2021 and is an executive mindset and performance growth coach, an international speaker, and a professor of leadership at Villanova University. She has over 20 years of experience in leadership in the healthcare sector at Fortune 500 companies like Pfizer, Boston Scientific, and Medtronic, and was the founder of her own healthcare startup. As a coach, she's passionate about empowering leaders to get the most out of their teams so they can achieve the results they deserve. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. It's a pleasure to have time with you today.
Well, it's interesting. I was looking at Medtronic, and I did some work for Medtronic many hundreds of years ago as a consultant. So it's interesting to have you with us today and know that you worked with them as well. So, you've got this wonderful honor of being this fantastic coach, a leadership coach. So since you've worked with so many of them, what are the main mistakes that leaders make?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think this is something that often gets overlooked, even though it's talked about so much. It still is not, we'll call it socially acceptable to really talk about the mistakes that we are making as leaders. And when I talk about leadership, I talk about leadership as a verb more than anything else. And all of us are formal and informal leaders. I think the research points a lot to trust. When a leader does not feel like they are in an environment of trustworthiness, when they do not feel that they can speak freely or express themselves openly about mistakes that they are making, then they are less likely to communicate their mistakes. So for example, the number one fear of executives worldwide is incompetence. And the reason that leaders fear being viewed as incompetent is because the workplace culture, at least in the United States, has yet to make it widely acceptable for leaders to make mistakes. So the main mistake that leaders make is not talking about the mistakes they make.
Well, I think it goes both ways, Erin, doesn't it? I mean, I think there's a trust issue from the employee standpoint as well as a leader. And I think there's also this inability to be honest, and to bring out some of the points that are important to making a business work. So what do you think it takes to be an inspiring leader other than trust?
Self-awareness. To your point, it's absolutely about self-awareness. If a leader does not have a level of self-awareness to be able to identify the gaps, to not only see their strengths, but also areas of development, it becomes very challenging for them to engage in any type of self-reflection that can be helpful to them in order for them to exhibit those characteristics of honesty and trustworthiness.
So how would you say that we get the most out of our teams as leaders? I mean, hopefully we're inspiring trust from the time that they join us, because that's why someone would want to come to work for a company and for a person, because you find that most people leave their jobs not because they don't like their job, but because they don't like their boss or their leader. So what is the best way to get the most out of teams?
Yeah, so the theme, I think, of the conversation today is, it really is built around trust. So let me give you an example. So we have the executive mindset, we have the growth mindset, and we have the fixed mindset, okay? So focusing on growth mindset and fixed mindset, what can and does happen with leaders, and this will help answer the question how to make the most out of the team. What can and does happen with leaders is leaders are afraid to stay in a growth mindset and believe they have to, in some cases, start out in their leadership roles in a fixed mindset. So what does that mean? It means the leader is going to be less likely to show up authentically. The leader is going to be less likely to show up with honesty about what they can do, what they cannot do earlier on in the process. So in order to make the most out of a team as a leader, we cannot make the assumption that the leader starting out with that team has already created an environment of trust. Building rapport and trust are oftentimes really kind of brushed off to the side as teams do come together. I have a recent example of a leadership team I was working with where every individual, for the most part, had decades of experience and were certainly considered experts in their field of work. And so when the team was brought together, they immediately started to focus on project outcomes, what needed to be done, the strategic imperatives. And about 6 months into the project, there were some major communication breakdowns, almost surprising to the group that individuals with so much experience and time in their line of work would arrive at this place of such a breakdown. And what ended up coming out of certain conversations, trust was never established. Rapport was never built. Everybody kind of made the assumption that coming together, everybody had enough experience to kind of move forward and be effective without making time to build that trust and rapport. So making the most out of the team really starts with that trust and really starts with building rapport. And it is also about communication, but not just verbal communication. It's also about nonverbal communication, and it's also about material communication.
Well, you know, you're right, because they always say nonverbals speak louder than verbals. Don't tell me what to do, show me, you know. So I think you're right on with that. But have you seen a difference in the communication style of male leaders versus female leaders? You know, years ago, gosh, it's got to be 30 years ago now, I used to teach leadership skills for women. And it was very interesting to me that at that point, I don't think it's true anymore, but at that point, women much preferred to work for a male boss as compared to a female boss. They didn't trust the woman. They felt there was too much competition. And it was very interesting to me that they were really non-supportive. I'm just wondering how that has changed. And I wonder, too, about the communication style of both.
It's a fantastic point. And here's what I will say. I will say it's changing. However, we have a lot of work to do. I was recently interviewed on NBC 10 about this exact topic. Female leaders now more than ever, and I'll answer the first question about communication style in a second. Female leaders now more than ever are wanting to see other females rise to the top. There's no question about it. There's a lot more of vocal expression about that. However, those same female leaders continue to prefer to work for men. There are studies to support this. And in fact, when you talk about even bullying in the workplace, the majority of workplace bullying is still women bullying women. So the majority of the time that women are bullying in the workplace, it is women bullying women. And there is, in fact, a phenomenon called queen bee syndrome, where as a female rises up the ranks in an organization, she has a tendency toward being more discriminatory toward lower level employees, in particular women. And a lot of this is based on the fact that it is in our DNA, those of us who identify as female, to actually compete for resources. And it's something that's kind of a simple fix, because once we recognize it, we can allow it to fall away, recognize it doesn't serve us anymore. There's no longer a need for us to compete for those resources, and it allows us to be more supportive of each other in the workplace. Now, what I will also say to that is, as you asked, what are the differences between communication and between men and women these days, it continues to be different. And one of the notable differences is how we lead. So I talk about this less as masculine and feminine, because we all have all of these characteristics, and I talk about it more as being, I use Chinese practice elements like yin and yang. But essentially, as a leader, a lot of women are are sort of developed to become very much initiators, activators, a lot of output, a lot of giving, a lot of providing. These are defined as more yang traits, or some might even say masculine. There's a whole other side of leadership to include things like not just active listening, but holistic listening, also building a sense of community, creating a safe space, a space of trust that a lot of women and men over the years have not cultivated. So it shows up a little bit different between men and women still, but the fact is we have all of these qualities within us. It's just a matter of the workplace culture really empowering that in both men and women. So a lot there.
So do you think that it comes from what we experience as an employee or as a person who is going to work, or do you think that a lot of it is rooted in how we're brought up and the values that we are taught as we develop as a woman?
Absolutely. To that point, I mean, it's something that it's fed in the workplace, but it started way sooner before that. In fact, there's an article that talks specifically about this, how little girls are raised, again, those who identify as such, are raised to be valued for being a good helper. So, for example, you might have experienced this yourself, or those who are listening might resonate with this. As a little girl, when we are good at things, we are praised for it. As little boys, as this article states, those who identify as such, they tend to be taught at a young age that they can get better at things. They tend to be taught at a young age, I know you can do better, try harder, things like that. So what happens as we grow up and we get into the workplace, as women, we are either good at things or we're not. And so it becomes more challenging for us to feel qualified or to really feel like we can even improve. We kind of step into roles feeling like we need to be very good at things, even if we're not. And as young men stepping into the workplace, what happens is men tend to know that they can actually improve or get better because that's how they were raised. And so they will go after roles that maybe they don't feel as qualified for, but it's something that they can work toward.
Erin, I feel so lucky talking to you. I was raised by a mom who just told me, I could do anything, and also I could get better at anything, and that when something didn't work out, I had to face the consequences, which I did not like to do. I mean, I remember sometimes when I would just break down in tears because, I was a dancer, and I got picked to do the Roxyette tour in the summer. I was 16 years old. And my mother didn't like the answers they gave as to how we would be chaperoned and wouldn't let me go. And that was like, killing my dream. And then one time I tried out for a show and I didn't get it. And my partner got it, even though I was the one that had taught him how to dance. But they didn't have any male dancers. And I was really frustrated. And my mother said, grow up. This is not the big time. This is, just where you are. So I had to face things, and I wasn't always glad about it. But it also gave me strength of character, which I'm very, very grateful for. So what habits have helped you improve your performance as a leader?
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I would have to agree with you. I was taught at a young age that I am capable of doing anything, and that has been my pathway. And that being said, I do think some of the social influences along the way had me feeling like I had to work harder perhaps than others to get to the places that I arrived at. I'm sure that could be a whole other conversation for us. But, so to answer your question, for me, it really has been through the challenges that I have faced as a leader. You mentioned Medtronic. One of my most challenging roles as a leader was at Medtronic when I was responsible for some international businesses. It was my first time really managing P&Ls, and I had 3 and, about 200 direct and indirect reports. It was a massive undertaking. I lacked experience as a leader, and I lacked self-awareness. It wasn't even that I lacked confidence. I had all the confidence in the world, enough to have me in denial to some extent about areas of development. And so for me, a lot of my shifting and transformation has happened because I've never been afraid to ask for help. Throughout all of my, battles with ego and wanting to show up as powerfully as I can, I've always had a very, very strong support system. I've always had mentors. I've always had, I've had coaches back to back since 2008. That started with my executive MBA program at Villanova. And, so I've never been afraid to ask for help. And I've also I've made time for self-reflection along the way, and not to the extent that I'm going down a bunch of rabbit holes, but to the extent that I'm able to make changes based on challenging experiences. And I also prioritize well-being. And this is something that I've done for several years that has completely transformed my abilities as a leader. And I would say is perhaps the most effective tool that I have. And that is my mindfulness kit, setting boundaries, making time for self-care. I've become so much more productive. I probably work more hours. I probably am more productive than I ever have been throughout my 20-plus year career in healthcare and leadership and coaching, and I am not working the hours that I used to. And, I'm married with a wonderful husband, wonderful children. I'm present and engaged for my parents and my family. I'm a runner. I'm an ultra marathoner. And, I get 8 hours of sleep every night.
Well, all of those are important, and I can attest to the fact about mindfulness and self-care and things like that, because if you go on automatic pilot all the time, you're going to burn out. And so the fact that you take time to do these other things, and the fact that you also have this other part of your life, with your family, important. So what would you say would be some effective strategies to advance a person's career as a woman? In other words, I'm assuming, there are women who just don't care to have a family. But of course you can never put self-care aside. That's one of the most important things that you can do. But what are some of the other effective strategies you think that women need to put into their lives?
Well, it's a wonderful question. I will say this. Women have a tendency, again, there is research to support everything that I'm saying, and at the same time, it is not everyone's experience. I like to make time in every conversation I have to say that I will not make assumptions that what I do is going to work for everyone. However, everything that I do is research driven. So one of the pieces of research that really stood out to me a few years back was this idea that women inherently ask themselves this question, what's wrong with me? And it tends to drive a lot of unhealthy, high-performing behaviors. So where we tend to want everything to look a certain way, things like that. So the first step a woman can take is, a female leader can take, and anyone really, is redefining success. Redefine your personal definition of success over and over and over again. If you did a vision board 20 years ago, it's time to recalibrate. I check in with my definition of success every 90 days, and I don't just think about it, I write about it. I look at what's happening in my life. I look at what my current desires are. So redefine your personal definition of success. Number 2, call me biased, but get a coach. Women struggle making that financial and time investment in themselves, and it is worth it. I can't tell you how many women I've talked with that want to invest in a coach, but feel that what they have and what they need is not as important as what their family needs. And the fact is, it's the opposite. If the woman is not fully investing in themselves, whatever that looks like, everything else is going to suffer because of it. And the final thing I'll say is nothing needs to change. So there's nothing that a woman needs to do. There's nothing wrong with where women are at today. And there is always an opportunity for women to tweak and sort of co-create an environment that feels best for them. So making choices without feeling like they have to make choices. And one other thing I'll add too is setting those healthy boundaries. Boundaries is a topic that we think we all kind of have figured out, but if you haven't gone through some type of formal program or coaching process that involves healthy boundary setting, there's a really good chance that there's a lot of blind spots in that area.
It's interesting you mentioned some of those things because, again, I think that's a male-female difference, and that is men will ask for help, or men will go get help, and men will, they'll just do what needs to be done, whereas a woman would consider that kind of a sign of weakness. So it's, it's something to think about. And of course, let's face it, what makes a woman and a man are all important aspects as well. And that's why women actually make much better leaders than men do. But still, there is that hesitancy there. So if you were giving your younger self advice, Erin, what would you tell your younger self that you look back and say, why did I do that?
It's a great question, and I've reflected on that myself. For me, as a high performer and high achiever, that's just kind of how I was raised. I think I would remind my former self that it isn't all about performance. Over the years, making it all about performance really detracted from my ability to cultivate other leadership characteristics like holistic listening, which is a very brief description of that, is listening to somebody without an agenda, listening to somebody without a question to ask when they're done. Also just that presence and that mindfulness, letting somebody else lead, letting somebody else win. I had a really hard time with that growing up. The U.S. is it's such an individualistic society, which is so beautiful and so empowering in so many ways. But what it does is it takes away from that collectivism if we're not careful. And so I think for me, just being okay with having that learner's mindset in my leadership roles, not being afraid to be viewed as incompetent, and actually seeing that there's a lot of humility in not knowing, knowing the definition of humility that I operate with today, which is what I am and what I am not, allowing for more humility, true humility in my leadership, and not being afraid to say, I don't really know what to do next. What are some of those suggestions? And just really holding more space for, less about performance and more about cultivating a practice with leadership.
Yeah, I look back on my youthful, because I've been in business for a very long time. And I look and I say, why did I do that? Or how did I do that? Or why did I do that? And at the time, it made a lot of sense. But, when I look back, I think to myself, maybe not. So I know that you have a free gift, which is a one-on-one consult, as well as access to free guided meditations. Where would people go to get those, Erin?
Yes, thank you for asking. The guided meditations have been a hit, by the way. So if you are looking for anything and they're quick and you don't have to be going to sleep to listen to them, you can be in the middle of the workday. Any material that I provide is designed for the high performer, high achiever. So all of my information, and you can also book a one-on-one consult with me, ask any questions that you have about the conversation today or in general. It is free. And you can find all of this at erinjewellconsulting.com. And if you want to make arrangements to speak, that would be erinjewellconsulting.com/bookings. And Erin Jewell is ERINJEWELL consulting, all one word.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you, it's just been an absolute pleasure, Erin, to see what you've accomplished in your life, and also how you've grown, and how you've challenged yourself, and how you've looked at yourself and said, what was good for me 5 years ago is not good for me now. And I've always looked at success and said, success is not equal to money. Success is equal to a lot of other things. And that's why it's important for everyone to have a definition of success of their own, because people are so much sidetracked by what other people think and do. And it's your own happiness and your own accomplishments and your own working that is so important as compared to what other people think. So it's really been kind of interesting for that. So is there anything else? We've got about a minute left. Is there anything else that we haven't said that you think our listeners should listen to or know about you?
The only other thing I might say about me, so I do take a strengths-based approach, and I do highly recommend that. So really just keeping the focus on an awareness of what it is I enjoy doing, because if we're going to redefine our personal definition of success, then it becomes much more important for us to understand what is it that we really enjoy. And as someone who was with a company, I was with Medtronic for about 10 years, and by the time I left the industry to co-found my first healthcare startup, I found myself really confused by that question. What is it that I really enjoy? I became good at what others saw me as good at, but it just was something that I really had to make time for to understand. So,
fantastic. Well, my guest has been Erin Jewell. You can find her at Erin Jewell Coaching or Erin Jewell Consulting, and take advantage of her free consult and also her free guided meditations. I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Erin. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for listening to Women in Business. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you have any suggestions as to who you'd like me to have as a guest, just email me at gailcarson13@gmail.com. Be sure to check out www.sob6tips.com. And in the meantime, go to www.spunkyoldbroad.com to see the resources I have for you.